She never meant to be found. For 12 years, Nadiya had buried herself in silence, in a city loud enough to swallow her whole, raising a daughter who had her mother's eyes and a stranger's silence. She thought she was safe. She thought he had forgotten. But the moment Choi Tae-yoon stepped into that boardroom, 6 feet of cold authority and ruthless precision, the air changed. Something ancient and terrifying stirred behind his eyes when they landed on her. And then her 8-year-old daughter looked up at the most feared CEO in South Korea and asked, in her small, fearless voice, "Why are you staring at my mom?" Welcome to Afro-Korean romance, where love has no borders. If you believe in love, please like, share, and subscribe for more Afro-Korean romance stories. The Seoul Meridian Tower cast a shadow so long it swallowed 3 city blocks. At its peak lived a man who had never once raised his voice and never needed to. Choi Tae-yoon ruled Meridian Global Holdings the way winter ruled, quietly, completely, without apology. Board members trembled before his silences. Rivals disappeared from markets without a single headline. He wore his power the way other men wore cologne invisible, but everyone felt it the moment he walked in. Nobody knew why he never married. Nobody dared ask. On a Tuesday that started like every other Tuesday, Nadiya Osai adjusted the strap of her laptop bag, smoothed her blazer over her curves, and walked into the Meridian Tower lobby with the quiet confidence of a woman who had survived too much to be afraid of a job interview. She was 34, beautiful in the way that stopped rooms, deep brown skin, full lips that curved easily into something warm and disarming, a figure that made women stare and men forget their sentences. But what people noticed second always was her eyes. They carried something, a weight, a story, a quiet fire that never fully went out. She was not here for the CEO. She was here for the communications director position, a respectable, safe, far away from billionaires kind of position. She had rehearsed her answers. She had arranged childcare for Sora. She had told herself this was just another interview. The elevator doors opened on the 42nd floor, and everything changed. He was already in the room. That was the first mistake. Nobody had told her he would be conducting the final round personally. Choi Tae-yoon sat at the head of a glass table, flanked by 2 executives who looked like they hadn't breathed freely in years. He wasn't looking at the door when she walked in. He was reviewing a document, his jaw set, his dark eyes moving with sharp efficiency across the page. Nadiya sat. She introduced herself. She was professional, composed, brilliant even, answering every question with the kind of clarity that came from years of grinding through corporate structures while raising a child alone. And then Tae-yoon looked up. It was only a second. 1 second where his eyes met hers across the glass table, and something in his expression, just beneath the surface, just behind the ice, cracked. Not visibly. Not in any way the other executives would have caught. But Nadiya felt it, the way you feel a shift in weather before the sky changes color. She looked away first. Her pulse was misbehaving and she hated it. She got the job. She told herself it meant nothing that he had been the one to nod. The first week at Meridian was a masterclass in controlled chaos. Nadiya's role placed her in constant motion, press releases, media management, crisis communication. She was good at it. Exceptional, actually. Her team noticed within 3 days. Her director noticed within 5. Tae-yoon noticed within 2. He didn't say anything. He simply began appearing in places where she was working, standing at the glass overlooking the communications wing, pausing in the corridor when her voice carried from a conference call, his coffee cooling in his hand while his eyes tracked her movement across the open floor. He was not a man who hovered. Everyone who worked for him knew that. So when he began hovering, quietly, without explanation, the whispers started. Nadiya was too focused to hear them. Then came the Thursday that unraveled everything. Her daughter's school had called mid-morning. Sora had developed a fever, needed to be picked up, and Nadiya's usual emergency contact, her neighbor Mrs. Chun, wasn't answering. Nadiya had no choice. She picked Sora up, brought her back to the office just long enough to collect her things, and was halfway down the corridor with an 8-year-old pressed to her hip when the elevator opened and Tae-yoon stepped out. The hallway contracted. He stopped. She stopped. Sora, feverish and unfiltered in the way only sick children could be, looked up at the tall Korean man in the perfectly tailored suit who was staring at her mother with an expression she didn't have the vocabulary for yet, and said, loudly and clearly, "Why are you staring at my mom?" The entire floor went silent. Tae-yoon's gaze dropped to the child slowly, the way a man drops his eyes when he is trying to control something large and internal. Sora stared back at him, unafraid, feverish-cheeked, her curly hair in two lopsided puffs, her mother's same dark eyes watching him with quiet assessment. Then Tae-yoon did something no one on that floor had ever seen him do. He crouched down to her level. "Because," he said, his voice quieter than anyone had heard it, "your mother is the most competent person in this building. It's difficult not to notice." Sora considered this with the gravity of someone twice her age. "Okay," she said, "but she's also sick. She's leaving." "I know," he said, and then, still crouching, he looked up at Nadiya. "Take the rest of the day. Your work is already ahead of schedule." Nadiya opened her mouth, closed it, said, "Thank you," in a voice that came out steadier than she felt, and walked to the elevator. She didn't look back, but she felt him watching until the doors closed. Later that night, with Sora asleep and a cup of tea going cold on her kitchen counter, Nadiya sat with her phone face down and made herself think clearly. She had run once before. She had rebuilt once before. She had given up the version of herself that trusted too easily, that fell too hard, that believed men who wore power beautifully could also love gently. She had learned that lesson at 22 when she left South Korea pregnant and heartbroken, telling no one, not even him. Especially not him. She pressed her fingers to her mouth and stared at the ceiling. Tae-yoon would not remember her. It had been 12 years. She had been a graduate exchange student. He had been the rising son of a corporate dynasty, 26, brilliant, unreachable, and for 4 impossible months hers in secret. She had been nobody. She was still nobody to him, surely. And yet, the way he'd looked at her in that interview room, the way he'd crouched in that hallway and spoken to her daughter. "Stop it," she told herself. "You have a daughter to protect." She went to bed and did not sleep. The next day, Tae-yoon called a company-wide communications review and asked Nadiya to lead the presentation. In front of 60 people, she did not falter once. She was sharp, prepared, unreadable. The room was with her from the second slide. Even the executives who had initially questioned hearing someone new nodded along by the third section. Tae-yoon sat at the back of the room, arms folded, face unreadable, and watched her the entire time. After, when the room cleared and only the stragglers remained, a junior executive named Park Sang-woo lingered near Nadiya. He was attractive, charming in that easy, practiced way, mid-30s, smooth talker, the kind of man who collected smiles from women and hung them on his wall. "Brilliant presentation," he said, stepping closer than he needed to. "I'd love to take the genius behind it to lunch sometime, if you're free." Nadiya smiled politely. "I'll keep that in mind." From the back of the room, Tae-yoon had not moved. Park Sang-woo leaned slightly closer. "I'm serious. You're remarkable, and frankly, someone should be telling you that regularly." The temperature in the room dropped 3 degrees. Park Sang-woo turned to find Choi Tae-yoon standing directly behind him. Nobody had heard him cross the room. "Sang-woo," Tae-yoon said, his voice perfectly even, "didn't you have the Osaka report due this morning?" The man paled. Yes, sir, I was just..." "Then I'd focus on that." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Park Sang-woo was gone before the sentence finished. Tae-yoon turned to Nadiya. He said nothing for a long moment. His jaw was tight in a way that could have meant anything. "Good work today," he said finally. "Thank you," she said. He walked away. She breathed for the first time in 60 seconds. A few days later, a package arrived at Nadiya's desk. No note. A premium air purifier for a child's bedroom, brand new, from a store she'd once glanced at briefly on her phone during a lunch break in the open office. She stared at it for a long time. Then she walked to his office. His assistant tried to stop her. She smiled past him, knocked once, and opened the door. Tae-yoon looked up from his desk. He did not look surprised. "You can't send things like that," she said, keeping her voice low and even. "Like what?" "For Sora," she set the order receipt she'd tracked down on his desk. "I don't know how you found out what I was looking at, but—" "Your laptop faces the window," he said simply. "The reflection." She stared at him. "That's—" "She had a fever." His voice was quiet. "The air quality in your district is poor. It's a practical concern." "She's not your practical concern." Something shifted in his face. Subtle, brief, but Nadiya saw it and her heart clenched involuntarily. "No," he said, "she isn't." The words were agreement, but the way he said them made them sound like something entirely different, like grief, like restraint. Nadiya picked up the receipt, turned and left. She did not return the air purifier. That evening, she found herself at her kitchen table with an old photograph she hadn't looked at in years, herself at 22, laughing at something off-camera, taken in a park in Seoul. She didn't remember who had taken it. She knew who had made her laugh. She closed the photo and put it away. The following week, a story broke in a business magazine, a profile on Choi Tae-yoon that included a section about his personal life, or the notable lack of one. The journalist had been thorough and slightly ruthless. Words like emotionally unavailable and pathologically private featured prominently. There was a quote from a former associate. "Tae-yoon is a machine. He doesn't love things, he acquires them." Nadiya read it in the break room and did not feel the satisfaction she expected. She felt something closer to anger. She didn't examine why. Tae-yoon, for his part, walked past the break room 10 minutes later, saw the magazine open on the table and looked at Nadiya. Just looked. His expression was closed, as always, but his eyes were doing something else entirely. "It's not accurate," she said without meaning to. He tilted his head slightly. "No." "The machine part." She closed the magazine. "A machine wouldn't send air purifiers." The silence between them stretched and hummed. Then his phone rang and the moment dissolved. He answered it and walked away, and Nadiya told herself that she had not just defended him, that it meant nothing. The danger arrived, as it always did, without warning. Nadiya was working late on a Friday when she heard raised voices near the executive elevator. She ignored it for 60 seconds, then curiosity, or instinct, moved her into the corridor. 3 men she didn't recognize were in a heated exchange with Tae-yoon's head of security. They were dressed like professionals, but something was wrong with the edges, their eyes too cold, their posture too deliberate. She took out her phone and started recording. She didn't know why, she just knew. The men left. Nothing happened. But later, when she reviewed the footage and showed it to Tae-yoon's head of security because she couldn't explain what else to do with it, the man's face went very still. He took her phone, copied the footage, and said, "Don't mention this to anyone." "Should I be worried?" He hesitated 1 second too long. "Just be careful." That night, Tae-yoon appeared at her apartment door. She opened it in her house clothes, soft trousers, an oversized top, hair loose around her shoulders. And for a moment, just a moment, he simply stood there and breathed like a man who had been running. "You should have come to me directly," he said. "With what?" A video of men arguing. "Those men work for Shin Di-won." He said the name like it was a warning. "He runs a corporate espionage operation. He's been attempting to destabilize Meridian for 2 years. Those men were not there to argue." Nadiya's fingers tightened on the door. What were they there for? Tae-yoon's eyes moved past her briefly, toward the soft lamplight of her living room, toward the crayon drawings on the fridge visible from the doorway, toward the evidence of a small, warm life she had built. When his gaze came back to hers, it was different. Stripped of its corporate armor, something older and more honest behind it. "They were mapping the building," he said, "looking for vulnerabilities." A pause. "I need to know that you and Sora are safe." The air between them changed. "We're fine," she said quietly. "We don't have anything to do with your enemies, Tae-yoon." It was the first time she'd said his name without a title attached. He noticed. His jaw moved. His eyes held hers with an intensity that asked everything and said nothing. "I know," he said finally, "but I need to know anyway." He posted a security detail outside her building that night. She discovered it the next morning, a quiet man in a dark car who nodded at her when she left for work. She went back upstairs, sat on her kitchen floor, and pressed her palms to her eyes. "Don't," she told herself, "do not do this again." Sarah, by this point, had developed an opinion about everything. She had been dropped off at the office twice more, once due to a school professional development day, once because Nadiya's childcare had a family emergency. Both times, Sora had moved through the Meridian offices like she owned them, charming the communications team, eating biscuits from the executive lounge, and at one memorable point, sitting in Tae-yoon's chair while he was in a meeting and announcing to his assistant that the chair was very comfortable and she understood why he was the boss. His assistant had, apparently, relayed this information. Because on the second visit, when Sora had fallen asleep on the office sofa waiting for Nadiya to finish a crisis call, Tae-yoon had come in, looked at the sleeping child for a long, still moment, and then, without being asked, without explanation, taken off his suit jacket and laid it over her. Nadiya walked out of her call to find her daughter asleep under a jacket that cost more than her monthly rent, and Tae-yoon standing by the window with his back to her and his arms folded, like a man standing guard. "You didn't have to." "She looked cold," he said, not turning around. Nadiya stared at his back, at the broad line of his shoulders, at the way he stood, not like a man who was performing kindness, but like a man who genuinely could not help it. And that, more than anything, was the thing she had no defense against. She had prepared for power. She had prepared for charm, for pursuit, for the kind of aggressive attention that powerful men sometimes mistook for affection. She had not prepared for this, for quietness, for the jacket, for the way he stood guard over a child who was not his. Except, Nadiya closed her eyes. "Except she is," said the voice she had been silencing for 12 years. "She is exactly his." She didn't sleep that night. She lay in the dark and did the mathematics of 12 years and came up with the same answer she had been refusing to look at since the moment he walked into that boardroom. Sarah was 8. 8 years ago, Nadiya had been 2 months out of Seoul, alone, terrified, and already in love with a child she hadn't planned for. The timing was exact. The resemblance, the one she had trained herself not to see, was exact. Sora had her mother's eyes, but she had her father's jaw, her father's quiet assessment, her father's stillness. Nadiya pressed her face into her pillow and made a sound that had no name. She had made a choice 12 years ago that she had believed was the right one. She had been a student from Ghana with no money, no connections, and a love affair with a man whose family was a dynasty. His world had no room for her, or so she had believed. So she had disappeared rather than complicate his path. She had told herself it was for him. She had told herself it was for Sarah. But lying in the dark now, she understood something she had never fully admitted. She had also been afraid. Afraid he wouldn't want them. Afraid of being left anyway, but later, when Sarah was old enough to understand the leaving. So she had left first. And now he was laying his jacket over their daughter in an office in Seoul, and standing guard by the window, and sending air purifiers, and clearing rooms of men who stepped too close. And he didn't even know why. The crisis came from an unexpected direction. One of Meridian's internal leaks, the one Tae-yoon's security team had been tracking for months, broke publicly on a Wednesday morning. Confidential restructuring plans hit 3 major media outlets simultaneously. The Meridian communications team was plunged into damage control before most of them had finished their morning coffee. Nadiya was at the center of it, drafting responses, fielding press, coordinating across departments with the kind of focused calm that only someone who had weathered worse could manage. By noon, she had stabilized the narrative. By 2 in the afternoon, the story had shifted from disaster to managed event. At 3, Tae-yoon's board sent him a report noting that the communications response had been exceptional. He walked into her office at 4. She looked up from her desk, tired, ink on her hand, one curl escaping her pinned hair, and he stood in the doorway with an expression she had never seen on him before. Open, almost, the armor thinner than usual. "You saved us today," he said. "I did my job," she said. Nadiya, her name in his mouth, low and careful, like something he was learning the shape of. That was more than a job. She looked down at her desk. Her throat was doing something complicated. "Don't," she said softly. "Don't what?" "Don't look at me like that." She still wasn't looking at him. "I can't. I need this job to stay what it is." The silence stretched. Then he stepped fully into the office and closed the door behind him, and the quality of the air changed entirely. "Why did you leave Seoul?" he asked. Her head came up slowly. He was watching her from across the room with an expression that made her chest tighten so hard she had to breathe through it. He wasn't moving. He was just looking. The way he'd been looking since the first day, but without the layers now. "You weren't in Seoul," she said carefully. "We've never." "I have an excellent memory," he said quietly. "And I remember a woman in a green coat at a graduate exchange dinner 12 years ago who argued with a professor about crisis communications theory and was absolutely right. I remember spending the rest of that evening trying to find a reason to keep talking to her." A pause. "I also remember that she disappeared 3 weeks before the semester ended. No warning, no forwarding address." Nadiya's hands were perfectly still on her desk. She was holding herself very carefully, like glass. "You have the wrong person," she said. "I have the exact right person," he said. "I've known since the interview. I just didn't understand yet why you came back." His voice dropped. "Or why you left." The silence between them was enormous. "Tae-yoon." "She has my jaw," he said. The world stopped. Nadiya looked at him and could not speak. He was not angry. She had braced for anger, had written the script for it in her head 100 times, the explosion, the accusation, the cold fury of a man who had been kept from something. But he wasn't any of those things. He was just still, the way he was always still. But this stillness was different. It was grief. It was restraint wrapped around something vast and overwhelming that he was holding with both hands. "Tell me I'm wrong," he said, and then quieter, "Please." She couldn't. The tear that slipped down her face surprised her. She didn't cry easily. She hadn't cried about this in years. But something about the please, the one word he had said without armor, without control, undid her. "I was 22, she said. Her voice was almost steady. "You were." "I know what I was," he said. "Tell me about you. Tell me what you were thinking." "I was thinking that your family had plans for you." She looked at the desk. "I was thinking that I was a foreign student with no money and no name, and you were Choi Tae-yoon, and that the world you were walking into had no door for me. I was thinking," she stopped, swallowed. "I was thinking that it would be better to leave than to watch you leave later." The quiet after that sentence was the loudest thing she'd ever heard. He crossed the room. She didn't move. He stopped in front of her desk, close enough that she could see the exact moment the control he'd been holding cracked open. His eyes were doing something she didn't have language for, dark and overwhelmed and unbearably, painfully human. "You thought I would leave," he said. "I thought you would have to," she said. "It's different." "I would not have left." 3 words, perfectly even. The steadiest, most devastating thing he had ever said. "You don't know that," she said. "I know myself," he said. "I have always known myself. I did not know why every relationship I touched felt wrong. I did not know why I had been working towards something my whole life without being able to name what it was." He paused. His jaw was tight. "I know now." "Don't," she said again, but it came out broken this time. "You took her from me," he said. And there finally the grief, not accusation, just grief, plain and enormous. "You took 12 years. "I know." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm not angry," he said, though his hands had curled at his sides. "I need you to understand that. I don't have anger for you. I have." He stopped. He breathed. "I have been angry at the wrong things for 12 years. I am finished with that." Nadiya covered her mouth with her hand. That evening, Tae-yoon met his daughter for the first time knowingly. It was arranged quietly, without ceremony. Nadiya brought Sora to the lobby of a small restaurant near the office, neutral ground, and sat across from the most powerful man in 3 industries, while her 8-year-old ate dumplings, and informed him that she had already decided he was interesting because he had a good voice, and good-voiced people are usually smart. Tae-yoon's face, when he thought neither of them was watching, was extraordinary. Like a man standing in the middle of a miracle trying not to show how completely undone he was. He answered every one of Sora's questions with the seriousness they deserved. Yes, running a company was hard. No, he didn't have any pets, but he'd considered a dog once. Yes, her drawings on her mother's fridge were exceptional, and he meant that genuinely. When Sora announced that she was tired and put her head on Nadiya's arm, Tae-yoon looked at the two of them and said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "I want to do this right." Nadiya looked at him. "I don't know exactly what that looks like yet," he said, "but I want to, whatever you're willing to allow. I won't push, I won't demand." His voice was low and careful. "But I want you to know that I am not going anywhere." The threat found them 9 days later. Shin Di-won, the corporate enemy Tae-yoon had mentioned, had apparently decided that the most efficient way to destabilize Meridian's CEO was through leverage. Private investigators had been watching the executive team for months. When they identified Nadiya, new hire, suspiciously close to Tae-yoon, with a daughter whose age was immediately interesting, they brought the information to Di-won. Di-won moved on a Thursday afternoon. Nadiya's car was followed from school pickup. She didn't notice until the second turn. By the third, her stomach had dropped completely. She called the security detail, the quiet man Tae-yoon had assigned, but there was no signal in the underpass she was crossing. When she emerged, a second car had joined the first. She called Tae-yoon. He answered on the first ring. "2 cars," she said, her voice completely controlled even as her knuckles whitened on the wheel. "Following since the school, Sara's in the back." She heard him stand up, the sound of movement of doors of his entire security apparatus engaging in about 4 seconds. "Keep driving, do not stop, I'm tracking your phone, my team is already moving." A pause, and then, stripped of everything, "Nadiya, I have you drive." She drove. The next 12 minutes were the longest of her life. Sara, bless her, was watching a video on her tablet and hadn't noticed. Nadiya kept her voice even on the phone, kept her eyes on the mirrors, kept breathing. Tae-yoon didn't hang up. He didn't fill the silence with reassurance she didn't need. He was just there. A constant presence on the line, tracking her in real time, updating her quietly every 2 minutes. His security team intercepted the following cars at an intersection 3 kilometers from her apartment. Police arrived 2 minutes later. Tae-yoon had contacts that made the city move fast. When Nadiya finally pulled over and stopped shaking, the first thing she heard was his car arriving. He had come himself. He was across the street, and then beside her door, and then she was standing on the pavement, and he was there, not touching her, because Sora had climbed out and was watching everything with enormous, curious eyes, but close. So close she could feel the heat of him, the barely controlled urgency in every line of his body. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No." He looked at Sora. "Are you okay, little one?" "I'm fine," Sora said. "What happened? Why are there police cars?" "There was a misunderstanding," he said calmly. "It's handled. Are you hungry? I know a place with excellent hotteok." Sora's eyes lit up. Later that night, after hotteok and careful explanations and Sora finally asleep in a guest room in Tae-yoon's penthouse, the most secure building in Seoul, he had simply stated, and Nadiya hadn't had the energy to argue. Nadiya stood on his terrace and looked out over the city lights and fell apart very quietly. She didn't hear him come out. She felt him, the warmth at her back, then his hands, careful, deliberate, settling on her shoulders. Not demanding, not pulling, just there. She turned. And he was close, and the city was below them, and the night was enormous, and she had been so afraid and so tired for so long, and he was looking at her the way he always looked at her, like she was the only coherent thing in a world that made no sense, and she stopped fighting. "Tae-yoon," she said, and his name this time was not a warning. "I know," he said quietly. "I don't want to be afraid anymore," she said. "Then don't be." He raised his hand and touched her face, just his fingertips, just the edge of her cheek, like someone who has waited 12 years for the permission and does not intend to rush it now that it's been given. "I'm here. I'm not leaving. Whatever it takes, whatever comes, I'm here." She closed her eyes. The night held them both, high above the city, and something that had been broken for 12 years began, slowly and painfully and beautifully, to heal. Fade. The weeks that followed were not without difficulty. Shin Di-won was formally investigated. The men who had followed Nadiya's car provided the thread that unraveled 2 years of corporate espionage. Tae-yoon handled it with the precision of a man who had been waiting for exactly this moment. And by the end of the month, Di-won's operation was dismantled, and 3 board members who had been feeding him information were removed. The city buzzed with it, the media circled, and then, because these things always came out, a gossip outlet published a photograph, Tae-yoon outside a restaurant, Nadiya beside him, Sora between them. The headline was breathless and ridiculous. The comments were a disaster. Nadiya sat at her kitchen table and read every one. Tae-yoon appeared at her door that evening and sat across from her and said, "Tell me what you need." "To not be a headline," she said. "That I can't guarantee," he said honestly. "I am who I am. That comes with visibility. I'm sorry for it." He met her eyes. "But I can control the narrative if you'll let me." "How?" "By making it true," he said simply. "By making it something they can't reduce to a scandal because it isn't one." She looked at him. "What are you saying?" He was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that meant he was not searching for words, but deciding whether to say them. "I'm saying I don't want to hide you," he said. "Either of you. I've spent 12 years not knowing what I was missing. I don't intend to spend another day pretending it doesn't exist." His jaw tightened. "Sora is my daughter. You are." He stopped, started again. "You are the answer to every question I didn't know I was asking, and I am finished with not saying that out loud." Nadiya's throat was very tight. "We barely know each other," she said. "The adult version of each other." "Then let me learn you," he said. "Let me do it properly. Let me earn it." "You already sent an air purifier," she said, and the laugh that came out of her was surprised and slightly tearful. The corner of his mouth lifted, just barely, but it transformed his face entirely. "Consider it a down payment," he said. He learned her. He showed up on Saturday mornings with breakfast, not grandiose gestures, just good food, the kind she'd mentioned preferring once. He took Sora to the park and pushed her on the swing and looked, the whole time, like a man in a dream he was afraid to examine too closely in case it disappeared. He sat through 3 school events and 1 chaotic birthday party for Sora's friend, and did not look even slightly out of place, which was remarkable for a man whose office had a private elevator. He argued with her twice, genuinely argued, the kind that came from 2 strong people with strong opinions, and both times he listened when she made her point, and came back the next day with a concession that proved he'd actually heard her. That, more than anything, broke down the last of her walls. She had not been listened to in a very long time. He was jealous once more, publicly, barely concealed, when a journalist at a press event lingered too long near Nadiya, complimenting her work with a warmth that had a subtext. Tae-yoon appeared beside her so silently and so suddenly that the journalist stepped back on instinct, and then spent the rest of the evening very professionally on the other side of the room. Nadiya did not call Tae-yoon out for it until they were in the car. "You can't do that," she said. "He was. I know what he was doing. I handled it." "I know you did," he said. "I still can't watch someone look at you like that." She looked at him for a long moment. "Choi Tae-yoon," she said, "are you jealous?" "Consistently," he said without inflection. "It's a problem I'm working on." She laughed. She turned to the window so he wouldn't see how much. She failed. The confession came on a Sunday. They were in his apartment, Sora asleep in what had become, quietly and without formal announcement, her room, decorated over several weekends with items that had appeared without explanation, and Nadiya was reading on the sofa while Tae-yoon worked at his desk. This had become normal. The ease of it frightened her more than the difficulty had. "I loved you," he said. She looked up from her book. He wasn't looking at her. He was still looking at his work, but his hands had gone still. 12 years ago, he said. I didn't know the word for it then. I was 26 and I thought I was too controlled for that kind of thing. But when you disappeared, he stopped. I looked for you for almost a year. I told myself it was because no one had ever walked away from me, but it wasn't that. He finally turned. His eyes were steady and dark and completely open. It was because you were the only person who had ever argued with me about something that mattered and been right, and laughed at the exact moment I needed someone to laugh, and looked at me like I was a person rather than a position. And when you were gone, the world went very gray. Nadiya set her book down. I'm sorry, she said, and she meant it with her whole body. I'm so sorry, I made the wrong choice. I was afraid and I was proud and I made the wrong choice. I know, he said. He stood and came to the sofa and sat beside her, closer than he usually allowed himself in the quiet moments. I'm not telling you so you'll apologize. I'm telling you so that you understand. He turned to face her fully. When I say that I am in this completely, I need you to believe me. I'm not performing something. I'm not interested in this because of Sora. Sora is my greatest blessing and I will spend my life being grateful for her. But you, his voice dropped. You are who I choose, separate from everything else. You. She was not going to cry. She absolutely cried. He gathered her against him with the careful deliberateness of someone who did not do things carelessly, and she pressed her face to his shoulder and let herself feel it. 12 years of guarding and running and rebuilding, all of it unwinding at once. He held her like she was the most important thing he'd ever been trusted with. She let him. The proposal happened 6 weeks later, and it was not grand in the way the world would have expected from a man like Choi Tae-yoon. It happened in the kitchen of his apartment on a Tuesday evening. Sora was at the counter drawing. Nadiya was making tea. Tae-yoon came in from a call, looked at the two of them in his kitchen, light and color and noise that his apartment had never had before, and said, very quietly so only Nadiya heard it, I don't want to be afraid of losing this anymore. She turned. He was holding a ring that he had apparently been carrying for 2 weeks, a simple thing, elegant, exactly right, nothing performative. His face was calm. His hands were steady. His eyes were everything. Marry me, he said. Not because of what we owe each other, not because of Sora, because you are exactly who I want and I would like to stop pretending I don't know that. Sora looked up from her drawing, assessed the situation with the comprehension of a child who was 8 and very perceptive. Say yes, Mom, she said and went back to drawing. Nadiya laughed, the surprised, tearful, helpless kind, and held out her hand. He put the ring on slowly, like someone marking something permanent. And then he looked up at her, with the closest thing to undone she had ever seen on his face. Yes, she said, even though she'd already answered. She wanted to say it clearly. Yes. They married 4 months later, small, intentional, absolutely them. The city tried to make it a spectacle. They made it a Sunday afternoon with 60 people who mattered, a venue that had good light, and Sora in a yellow dress insisting on walking both of them down the aisle simultaneously, holding a hand on each side, which made everyone cry. Tae-yoon looked at Nadiya across the space between them, and his face was entirely visible. No armor, no layers, just a man seeing his life clearly for the first time and choosing it with every part of himself. The vows were private. No one published them. Some things belonged only to the people inside them. The following spring, cherry blossoms on every corner of Seoul, the city in that brief, extravagant bloom it only managed once a year. Nadiya stood in the bathroom of their home on a morning that smelled like coffee and Sora's laughter drifting in from the hallway. She was looking at a test. 2 lines. She stood there for a long time, holding something enormous and soft and terrifying. Then she walked out. Tae-yoon was at the kitchen counter. He saw her face and went very still, the deep, practiced stillness of a man who could read a room in seconds. He crossed to her. She held up the test. The thing that happened to his face then was something no boardroom, no crisis, no acquisition had ever pulled from him. It was complete, raw and complete and luminous. He took her face in his hands, pressed his forehead to hers, breathed. "Nadiya," he said, and it was not a sentence. It was a world. She covered his hands with hers. Outside, Sora was asking loudly whether anyone had seen her left shoe, and somewhere in the city Meridian Tower stood casting its long shadow, and somewhere Shin Di-won was still carrying the consequences of his choices, and the world went on being exactly as complicated and dangerous and beautiful as it always was. But here, in this kitchen, in this light, with his hands on her face and a new life beginning between them, everything was exactly right. Some loves are not found. They are found again, rebuilt from loss, chosen past fear, made whole not in spite of the years lost, but because of everything survived. Choi Tae-yoon had been the most feared man in 3 industries. He was afraid of exactly one thing now, wasting a single remaining moment. He did not intend to.